I'm the storyteller, and my stories must be told. I have many stories, tales for both the young and old. I have many voices to describe many places. Many names have I, and many faces. In Russia I am Ivan, in Sweden I am Jan. In Germany I'm Johann, in America I'm John. From my many travels I have gathered these tales to teach you good sense when all else fails. Sometimes there are tears, sometimes there is laughter, but always are happily ever after.
Long ago and far away, deep in the heart of a green and mountainous land, there once stood a grand stone castle high on a hill. Here lived a proud and noble prince who was well known for his many deeds of bravery. He was ruler of all the land as far as one could see. His wife, the princess, had once been very gay and pretty. But with time, her looks had faded, and her eyes had lost their sparkle. And although she still loved her husband, over the years they had grown apart. Early one morning, the prince left the castle, as he often did, to ride out in the nearby woods. This morning, as he rode through the wood, he saw something dart among the trees. It was a beautiful young maiden. And as suddenly as she had come, she disappeared. The prince called out, "Please, show yourself. I will not harm you." But the maiden did not appear again. The prince was curious. Who was she? Where did she come from? She was certainly very beautiful. But though he searched, he could find no trace of her. Perhaps he'd imagined her after all. At last he could tarry no longer and rode back to the castle. However hard he tried, he could not put the woodland maiden out of his mind, for she had cast a spell over him. So the next day, the prince hurried out to the woods, hoping that he might catch a glimpse of her again. As he searched for her among the trees, she suddenly appeared. The prince saw her. "Stop!" he cried. But she had gone. Again she appeared, and was gone again. The prince was just about to leave when suddenly she appeared in the clearing in front of him. The prince was spellbound. The maiden smiled and said, "I have something very important to tell you. When you return to the castle, you will find that your wife has disappeared. She will never return." The prince was very shocked to hear this. Could it be true? Who was this maiden? How did she know? He was just mounting his horse when the maiden stopped him and said, "My name is Morwen. I come from the fairy world, and I shall return to the castle with you. One evening each week, I must come back here to my world. You must promise not to follow me. If you agree, I shall stay young forever." The prince was completely under the spell of the fairy maiden, so he agreed, and together they rode back to the castle. And sure enough, when they returned, the prince found that the princess had indeed disappeared. When the servant brought them some refreshment, the prince asked, "Have you seen the princess?" But the servant had not seen her all day. Where had she gone? Had she left no message? No, the servant knew nothing. Time went by, and Morwen and the prince lived very happily at the castle. The prince was still completely bewitched by Morwen, and spent all the time he could spare from affairs of state with her. One evening each week, Morwen would leave the castle and return to her fairy world in the woods. But she always came back to the castle the next morning. The prince kept his promise and did not follow her. He began to wonder where she was going and what she was doing. It started to prey on his mind. Though Morwen was kind and loving as ever. As time went by, he grew more and more suspicious of her secret visits. Where was she going? What was she doing? The prince now grew more convinced that Morwen was under some evil spell, but he dared not question her. Then came the day of the royal hunt. The prince had invited all the important chieftains of the land to attend the hunt. Afterwards, there was to be a great banquet. The hunt went on all day and was most successful. At last, tired but jubilant, the hunting party returned to the castle. The prince greeted all his nobles. And thanked the master of the hunt. Then he led his guests away into the castle to prepare for the banquet that night. Among those the prince had invited to the banquet was Woodlands the monk. Wylan was held in high regard by all, for he was very clever and a learned man. There was something very special about Wylan that no one, not even the prince, knew. Wylan had great knowledge of magic. At the feast, the tables were spread with delicious foods, and everyone was celebrating the successful hunt. Wylan, being a very important guest, was seated at the royal table beside the prince and morwen. During the feast, Wylan studied the prince very carefully, for he could not help noticing that every time the prince looked at morwen, a troubled expression crossed his face. Morwen, laughing and gay, seemed happy and unconcerned. Thought Wylan, our prince is a very troubled man. The next day, Wylan suggested to the prince that they might take a walk in the castle grounds. They talked together about the recent war, the flood that had ravaged the south of the land, and the prince's new stock of cattle. When at last they stopped to rest, Wylan ventured to say, "Forgive me, my prince, but for a man who has everything, you seem sad and troubled." Prince hesitated only a moment. Then, happy at last to share his burden, he told Wylan all about Morwen's mysterious visits and how he was sure she was under some evil spell. "It would seem to me," said Wylan thoughtfully, "that the only thing in the world you do not possess is your peace of mind. I will give that back to you, but in return, you must give me morwen and a bag of gold to the monastery each year." Though the prince did not want to lose morwen, his fears and suspicions troubled him too much, so at last he reluctantly agreed. He said to Wylan, "Tonight is the night that morwen visits the fairies." With that, the prince rose, and he and Wylan made their way back to the castle. That night, Wylan waited for the appointed hour. Then he left the monastery, carrying with him his precious book of magic. The moon lit his way as he walked through the woods. On and on he walked, deeper and deeper into the thick undergrowth. At last, he came close to the cave which he knew led into the fairy world. As he walked down the steep slope towards the cave, he knew he must hurry, for morwen would be arriving at any minute and must not see him there. The night was chill, and an owl hooted eerily as Wylan climbed down towards the cave. At last, Wyland came to the entrance. He peered inside. There was a strange glow coming from within the cave. Then Morwen appeared. Wyland jumped back quickly behind a tree. Morwen turned back, and Wyland held his breath. At last, she disappeared into the depths of the cave. Wyland came out from behind the tree, and standing in front of the cave, he opened his book of magic and began to chant these secret words. Abra-dabra, Einem, Mayhem, Shabra-dabra-doo. Alem, Neelem, Sumen, Deelem, Cabra, Nabra, hoo. Then he said, "Let the prince find peace, for he has promised gold to the monastery and Morwen to me." He waited, and then slowly began to chant again. Phylum, Vellum, Dactus, Mactus, Quintum, Quantum, Lu. Nicum, Nacum, Siccum, Daptum, Sibra, Shabra, Shoo. Then he cried out, "I vow I will marry Morwen if she meets me at the monastery at dawn." He read on for a few minutes more, then he shut his book, and with one last look at the cave, Wyland slipped softly away. As Wyland struggled through the thick undergrowth, he felt sure that his spell would work and that the prince would once more regain his peace of mind. When at last he came to the monastery, who should he see standing there but a giantess? Couldn't be. Wyland was horrified, for it was indeed Morwen. Her expression was one of great sadness. "As you can see, I have become a giantess," she said sadly. "But you must marry me, for you vowed you would." Wyland had no wish to marry a giantess. What was he going to do? So Morwen, taking pity on him, said, "Come, let us walk a while, and I will tell you my sad story." "20 years ago, I was a beautiful young girl. It was then I met and married the prince. But as I grew older, I lost the affections of my husband. So I, like you, began to study magic. And I learned many things. One day, I decided to go and visit the fairies. I slipped away from the castle and walked through the woods until I came to their cave. There I told them my troubles and made a bargain with them that I would become a giantess for one night each week if they would make me young and beautiful for the rest of the week. So I became Morwen of the woodlands, and my husband fell in love with me again. We were happy together, just as we had been when we were first married. I kept my bargain with the fairies, and I believed that nothing could destroy our happiness. Morwen stopped by the monastery steps. Poor Morwen. She looked so sad as she continued, "But someone has chanted a spell against me and turned me into a giantess, forever. But you vowed to marry me, so let us go to the chapel." Wylan quickly opened his magic book and began to chant another spell to undo the first. Simbra, nomen, shalem, bomen, krabra, sabra, hu, domen, emen, salib, shemen, sanka, cabra, crew. Then he cried out, "May you be restored to the prince, and may peace be restored unto me." Then he made a sign. And in a trice, Morwen was returned to her normal size. Morwen was overjoyed. Away she hurried to the castle. And there she was reunited with her beloved prince. The prince loved her more than ever, for he saw in her both wife and woodland maiden. The prince and Morwen lived happily on at the castle for many years.